Hello, guys. It's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zicree of Space Command, and we're here on the live stream, which I am doing during our Kickstarter campaign to drum up support for Space Command and Mr. Sci-Fi and etc. Please go and pledge, even if it's only 5, 10, 15, $20. I mean, when I go through a whole day and it's just stuck at one number, it drives me crazy. So pledge whatever you can. Tell your friends. Make it happen because otherwise we will be sad. And you don't want to see a sad Mr. Sci-Fi like, whoa, so sad, Mr. Sci-Fi. No one wants that. So I'm happy to continue answering questions and being delightful and entertaining. I've brought a few things. I can show a few things that you have not seen before. So I'm looking at my other side of my bookshelf, and there are many, many things to talk about and share with you guys. I'll eat this banana while I'm doing my Mr. Sci-Fi because we all need to keep our strength up. So here is the first edition of Dune by Frank Herbert. Very cool John Schoner cover. And it's really fun because Dune, some of you know this, Dune had a very hard time selling and was rejected by all these different publishers. And finally, Frank Herbert submitted it to an automotive publisher. They published like repair manuals for cars. They'd never done science fiction before, and they bought it. And it was a monster hit. And it won the Hugo for Best Novel that year. And it put Frank Herbert on the map in a big way. He had been writing for over a decade in science fiction field, but not really punching through to that top level. And this made his name. It made his fortune. He was off to the races. And so for the remainder of his life, he wrote Dune novels and then non-Dune novels, and enjoyed a very comfortable life. And good for him. He deserved it. He worked hard. So now let's see if there's anything else I can show you. This, I believe, this is Princess of Mars, published in 1917. Great, another. I think it's that Frank's. Who I'm not. I'm trying to remember the name of that guy, but this is Edgar Rice Burroughs, of course. And I have a first edition, although I don't think this is one, but it's just great. It's got great illustrations. Frank E. Schoonover. Yeah, he's a wonderful artist, and it really captures the romance of that book. Edgar Rice Burroughs, I like Princess of Mars. I admire Tarzan. Of course, I've grown up with all these different movies based on these things, but I'm not a big fan of Edgar Rice Burroughs because I started by reading a lot of the English writers, Wells and Conan Doyle and H. Rider Haggard, and I found them so much more evocative. I found their vocabulary much richer, and I just I find Burroughs a little bit flat in terms of his prose. But again, he definitely makes it all work, and he again another guy who succeeded late in life and deserved the success he had. He was one of those, and L. Frank Baum was one of those. Some writers are very fast out of the gate, like Samuel R. Delany um, was publishing in his teens, and I was, yeah, getting radio plays aired when I was 18 and sold my first short story at 19. So some of us are lucky to start early, but others, they wander around, they try and find their calling, they don't succeed, and finally they find the thing that's right for them, and good for them, good for them. I'm glad when anyone finds the thing that makes them happy, because life demands much of us, and if we aren't happy, what's the point? So here's a kid book from the 50s, Spaceship to the Moon. Look at that, isn't that cool? Very fun, very fun. Whenever I come across these books that have really cool visions of spaceships or guys in spacesuits, I always grab them. And one of the other things I've been doing lately is, when I was a kid, I was growing up with all of these different writers who I was reading and loving and finding very interesting, but I never knew what they looked like. And because primarily I was buying paperbacks, they never had authors' photos on the paperbacks. So one of the people I was reading as a kid was Judith Merrill, and she was primarily an editor of like best science fiction of the year kind of stuff. And I often the stories she chose I would read and would not understand. But this is her first novel, Shadow on the Hearth. It's an after the bomb story, or during the bomb story. The bomb goes off, and this is signed by her, Judith Merrill. There we are. And then wonderfully, this has a photo of her, and there she is. Look at that, Judith Merrill. Pretty cool. Looks like a pretty interesting lady. And a lot. Science fiction was a very small community back then. Maybe a few thousand fans, and maybe a few, maybe 100 writers, maybe a few more, but certainly not huge. And it was these were the ones who were just really in it for the love of it. And this, interestingly enough, was made into a live TV show that I found, I think, on YouTube. And it was like, yeah, I'm fascinated by after the bomb stories because I grew up. Don't mean to keep turning away from you guys. Oh, hi, Kevin. I'll read your comment in 1 second. But I really am fascinated by after the bomb stories because I grew up during the Cold War, and we used to do drop drills and all these crazy ass things, and there was a constant sense that any moment the entire world could be blown away. And it gave life a certain precariousness, even for children. And so a big subgenre of science fiction were after the bomb stories. They were both mainstream versions like On the Beach and Failsafe and so forth, and then there were science fiction ones, and but almost every science fiction writer took a crack at an after the bomb story. Whether it was John Wyndham with Rebirth, which was published as the Chrysalids in England, or that Judith Merrill's one, Shadow on the Hearth, etc. But sometime I'll talk further about that. Kevin says, my first sci-fi book was Islands in the Sky. My dad had others like that on the shelf, but I was drawn to the cold harshness of space. Yes. Let me see if I can find it here. I have that book here. Let's see if I can find it while we're talking. Yeah, there it is. Islands in the Sky. Islands in the Sky. Look at this. It's very cool. It's like the Heinlein Juveniles. It's set on a space station. A lot of these science fiction books from the 50s. Look at that illustration. Look at that. Isn't that great? And a lot of these books. That was Alex Schomburg, by the way, another science fiction illustrator from that period. This is the fourth printing, 1957. A lot of these books were bought by libraries, and in recent years they've been decommissioning a lot of these books. This was the Maine State Library, Bookmobile number 3, Caribou, Maine, and then it was the Richville Library, Sabaco Lake, Maine. But a lot of these books, because they're from the 50s, I suppose they're not being checked out very often, and yeah, like when was the last date on here? You know, um, God knows, but it was like they a lot of these libraries have limited space, and so they winnow down their collections. But it's very. But I'll show you something super cool. Hold on, look at this. This is Islands in the Sky, signed by the author, and has such a cool story to it because it's signed by Arthur C. Clarke, and the person who sold it to me, when you would go to Arthur C. Clarke's home in Colombo, Sri Lanka, he would take a book off his bookcase and sign it to you. And if you look very closely at this book, Arthur C. Clarke has stamped his name and address on the inside front cover. And so this is a really cool thing because it's not just Arthur C. Clarke's signature, but it's also his personal book stamp. And I love it. And this is the lovely dust jacket of that Alex Schomburg illustration. Really, really lovely. And you know, really a pleasure to own. A thrill. Now Dusty Dirt says Day of the Triffids was mine. It's funny that you should mention that because if we go over here, let's see, somewhere up here, yes, here is. This is the first edition of Day of the Triffids. There it is. And really, really a cool cover. I mean, look at that thing. This is the first British edition. And it was owned by a guy named Irving Allen, not Irwin Allen. People used to put book plates in their books so they would know who owned it. And this is one of the great books of science fiction, absolutely. First edition. And this is what John Wyndham looked like, though actually he was significantly older than this. This was a photo from the 1930s, and this was published in the 50s, but he wanted to look more youthful, and that's why he was a very shy man, was not photographed very often, but really a terrific writer. My favorite book of his, I mean, I love The Day of the Triffids. I love The Midwich Cuckoos, which is, of course, Village of the Damned. But my favorite of all this books is the Kraken Wakes, the Kraken Wakes, which was published in America as Out of the Depths, Out of the Deeps, Out of the Deeps. But don't read the American version because they cut about 100 pages of the book out, thinking it wouldn't appeal to an American audience. It's a wonderful book about undersea invaders. It's basically if the creatures in the War of the Worlds were ocean breathers and sent their ships to crash in the ocean to then take over the earth. That's what the story basically is, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I cannot praise it highly enough. So, you know, but. But let's see what other things we can share with you guys. Now, also, again, as I mentioned earlier, before some of you came on, our Kickstarter campaign is going. There's a link to it down there. We're not getting enough pledges. We've hit the halfway mark. We're at $30,000, which is good because our target is 60,000. But if no one pledges, you know, we lose all the money and we can't shoot, we can't do anything. So we've already got 2 distributors lined up who want Space Command to sell it worldwide, and they're legit, they're honest. There's going to be profits. It's going to be great, but we've got to keep shooting. And the way we do it is selling investment shares for $7,500 each, and these Kickstarter campaigns. So please pledge, even if it's $10, $20, $50, $100. Great. Obviously, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 is even better. I'm going to be putting up a new perk where you can have a walk-on roll wearing a spacesuit. And so I'm going to do a video about that and put that out in the next day or two. But please spread the word. Let people know that we have a campaign going. It's really important, and I just hate when a day goes by without that total budging. So please help us get to the finish line. It's only 2 more weeks, and then done. So we gotta really keep our eye on the ball. So now here's another cool thing. This is Mission Gravity by Hal Clement. His real name was Stubbs, something Stubbs, but this is one of the classics of science fiction, and this is a cover by Wally Wood, who primarily was a comic book artist. He did a few covers for Galaxy magazine, and this is a Galaxy magazine novel. Um, but he's primarily one of the great EC Comics artists with weird science and weird fantasy, and but he was really wonderful, a wonderful artist, and he did a lot of comic books, and was just one of the greats. So let's see, any other questions? Yeah. So let me show you some other cool things I've dug out. This is Famous Monsters of Filmland, and this is their special Outer Limits episode when Outer Limits debuted, and that's the creature that Robert Culp gets turned into, and it's a great episode. But the fun part, of course, is that Outer Limits was in black and white, and so here you get to see the color version of that creature, and it's really spooky and really creepy. And they were very, very good at doing very unusual aliens. They had a great makeup and creature team, and there's so many other creatures really, really distinctive, including this one. And clearly what they wanted is it's interesting. I'll tell you about this story. The basic gag is that some scientists decide to create a fake invasion by aliens so that humanity will put aside its wars and its disputes and come together as one. That plot was lifted by Alan Moore in Watchmen. That was in the original graphic novel. That was used as a plot element, and that's sort of a tip of the hat to say, I know I'm stealing this. He had someone watching The Outer Limits at one point in the graphic novel, but Watchmen is so brilliant you can forgive it that, because that wasn't the key point of the story, and so that's okay. That's okay. Here's another cool thing. This is Rod Serling. When Twilight Zone was on the air, they published a special issue devoted to Rod Serling, in which they reprinted Walking Distance, which is very, very cool. TV Author and Reviewer magazine. And so this is actually something I came upon while I was writing the Twilight Zone Companion, and it is a treasure, and rare as hen's teeth. But you can just see that, how cool is that? And Rod was so handsome. He was such an amazingly good-looking and distinctive man, and and short, like 5'5", or so. And but Walking Distance is probably my favorite Twilight Zone. It was Rod's favorite, and the most autobiographical of his works, and just wonderful. And let's see what else. Now, also, if you guys want to ask me questions, or if you want to know anything about my interesting life and career, or want to know anything about how to make it in Hollywood, I'm happy to share those things with you guys, because what else am I doing tonight but helping you and advising you? So this is really a cool thing. They've been having World Science Fiction conventions since 1939 in New York, and every year, except for World War II, they had them annually. And this is an ad. This is a poster. This is an original, an ad for the 12th World Science Fiction Convention. It says, attend 12th World Science Fiction Convention here. Authors, engineers, see technology, art, cinema, theme, the future. And it's in San Francisco, Sir Francis Drake Hotel, September 3, 4, 5, 6, 1954, and send $1 to register. Look at that. Isn't that fun? Isn't that wonderful? And it has the Golden Gate Bridge with a rocket ship flying over it. So I mean, where this is one of those things where you find it and you buy it because you're never going to see it again, ever, 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 because it's rare as hen's teeth. But I really love it. So there we go. So what else can I do? Let's see. I'm loving your collection. Have you a count on how many items you have? Thousands, thousands, and thousands. I mean, basically, I'm always adding to it, finding things. I love rarities. Like, for instance, this is not the first edition of Dracula, but is the first edition of Dracula that has an illustration of him on the cover, and it's a great illustration. Look at that, with a wolf and Dracula with this long hair and a bat. This goes for several $1,000s when you're able to find it, and I didn't pay that, thank God. What I always look for are books that are valuable, but not at their full price. And sometimes I'll buy ex-library books, which are significantly less money, or I'll buy, a book without a dust jacket and put a facsimile dust jacket on, stuff like that. Because I'm not a purist, and I can't afford to be, because if I wanted first editions and in perfect condition, with dust jacket, that would put me back beyond what I'm willing to spend on that. Whereas meantime, I'm buying spacesuits and all that stuff for Space Command, and we have a lot of cool stuff to share with you very, very soon. You will be extremely thrilled. Now, again, for those who've come in the last few minutes, please pledge to our Kickstarter campaign, which is listed below. We're stuck. We hit 30,000. We're halfway there, but then it's just stalls out. I mean, it's these fits and starts. So please tell your friends, spread the word, throw some money our way. I mean, just to even have it budge by 25 or 50 bucks is heartening. And of course, the more the merrier, the more the better. And of course, if you buy a share in Space Command, you get all those great things like being sharing in my producer's net profits. Now that we're signing with a distributor, that's going to really help speed things along, and also you get all sorts of perks, and you get special dinners and tickets to conventions, all sorts of things. It's really cool. So but I basically, in terms of my collection, just to let you guys know, over on this side are all the science fiction paperbacks. Behind me are all the science fiction hardcovers. Slowly but surely, I'm alphabetizing them, and and then over that away are mysteries, mainstream fiction, also books I'm reading. I'm always reading several books simultaneously, and which I find very fun. Usually I'll be reading maybe one recent science fiction novel, maybe a classic science fiction novel, also maybe a history or some odd thing I've come across that interests me. Like, for instance, right now I'm reading a book about the creation of The Music Man, the Broadway musical, written by the writer, the composer and writer of the show. And it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful book, and wonderfully written, and very, very entertaining, and very interesting about the creative process. That's just I'm fascinated by that. I just also read a book recently about Jean-Michel Basquiat, written by his girlfriend, and his former girlfriend, because he's deceased now, of course. And I'll just read extremely broadly. I'm reading the book about Arthur C. Clarke collaborating with Peter Hyams on 2010, their correspondence. I come across stuff, and then I'll just read it, and when I'm whatever interests me. I'm very eclectic in my tastes. So what do you think about texting and social media's effect on grammar and writing? Well, it's just pathetic. People don't know how to spell. They don't know grammar. I mean, but again, it's endless that the older generation complains about the younger generation. I mean, this goes back to ancient Greece, and probably there was a Neanderthal who said those kids with their fire, they're just gonna. It's not like when I was a kid and we just ate food, raw. I mean, Jesus Christ, they're living too easy, those kids. You know, but I think the internet is more good than bad. I think the fact that we're able to communicate and share is so wonderful, and the technology of the modern day allows that. I'm not down on technology. I think people should be better mannered on the internet. I think it's very easy when you're hiding behind a name that isn't yours to feel that you can say and do anything. And I think we have to be very mindful of whether we're creating good in the world or harm in the world. I think anyone can be a good guy or a bad guy depending on the day. I mean, even Hitler liked dogs and seemed pretty nice to children, but he was of course a monster. But so I won't veer into politics, but he did poison his dog at the end so that was not too cool. So anyway, and he killed that mustache. I mean, that was the end of that mustache, unless you're a crazy white nationalist or something. I mean, Oliver Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, and Hitler just kind of, that's the end of that style. But c'est la vie. But and one thing that you don't actually recognize from the black and white newsreels of World War II is Hitler had very bright blue eyes, really amazing. And when I first learned that was when I saw the figure of him at Madame Tussauds. And then I started reading contemporary accounts where people would talk about just his eyes were just mesmerizing. And because he had the dark hair and these bright blue eyes, and pretty interesting. And he was very brave in World War One. He won 2 Iron Crosses. He was not in combat, but he was a messenger and running along the front lines and taking messages from one place to another. So he interesting history. Terrible what happened. I mean, terrible that we had World War II, and terrible what's happening in some places of the world right now. Again, I won't get political, but try in your personal life to be kind. That's all I can say. Try and not be part of the problem. Try and be part of the solution. And sometimes there's no easy answers, but if you just say, look, am I harming, or am I, you know, extending kindness? Am I helping people? It doesn't take a lot to be kind, but cruelty can emerge from thoughtlessness, and we have to kind of be very, very mindful of what we say and do in our daily lives. So there you go. Okay, other questions, guys? I'm happy to keep showing you some of the interesting things from the collection. Let me see what else we have. Let's see, interesting stuff. um, I'll show you a book I haven't yet gotten to, but heard it was very, very good. This is Limbo by Bernard Wolfe, and in England they published these masterworks. This was Harlan Ellison wrote an introduction to this book that said it's really terrific. Bernard Wolfe was bodyguard to one of the expats from the Soviet Revolution, Leon Trotsky. And while he was Leon Trotsky's bodyguard, Trotsky did not get murdered, and then after he left, Trotsky did get killed, assassinated. So fascinating stuff. But this is a sort of a dystopic novel. I just haven't. It's just one of the ones I haven't gotten around to yet, but will eventually. And let's see, what else do we have here that's cool. Here, of course, this is one of my favorite books of all time, The Martian Chronicles. And if you've never read it, you should. It's absolutely terrific. This is a first edition, and this is what Ray looked like at the time. He looked better in later years, but the bow tie's a little curious, the haircut's a little curious. But Ray was an amazing, amazing, amazing man, and this is one of my favorite books of all time. Just gorgeous. And if you only saw the TV version, do not, don't rely on that as this. It's much, much better. Let's see, Mark, you should do an updated stream from the studio with all the cool pieces here. Yes, Mira, you're right. I shall do that in the near future. That's a good idea. And we will absolutely do that, I promise. And, it's funny because we have these different locations now. We have the studio, which has the spacesuits and the spaceship consoles and the giant robot, and then my place, which has all the book and the author kind of stuff. And never the twain shall meet. But one only has so much space at home. but the studio allows me to be a little more eccentric than I am in general. Let's see, Hollywood. Let's see, Mark, you should do an update. Yeah. So, but we will do that, and the studio is really looking cool. And thanks for Mira, Mira Lacrouse, one of our wonderful supporters, who's helping David Bartlett wire up the consoles and get them to light up, and they're looking just spectacular, and with all the screens and the graphics going. And we're still looking for more spaceship graphics for the data screens. So if you guys like to design that kind of stuff, email me at marczicree@gmail.com. You'll get an on-screen credit. It's a really fun thing to have and to do. So, and actually, I was thinking of reaching out to Mike Okuda, whom I know, who worked extensively on Star Trek: The Next Generation and later iterations of that, and For All Mankind. And he's a wonderful designer, and he might have some suggestions, because I'd like to update the graphics that we have, and just kind of have cool stuff ongoingly. Let's see, what else do I have here? I'll tell you some interesting things. This is one of the great After the Bomb books. Canticle for Leibowitz, great cover. If you've never read this, I highly recommend it. There's also a great radio adaptation of it. It takes place several centuries after a nuclear war, when monks have kept literature alive, have kept books alive, as they did in the Dark Ages. And it's just a great book. It's very evocative, very thoughtful, and I recommend it highly. This is over here. I'll tell you something interesting about this. This is Leonard Nimoy's autobiography. Here it is. I Am Spock, and this is signed by Leonard Nimoy. Let's see where it is. There it is. Signed by Leonard Nimoy. Look at that. And I'll tell you one secret about this book that's not generally known. Decades earlier, he had written a book called I Am Not Spock, and he actually wrote that, apparently. But this was ghostwritten. So he was not the writer of this book. It was ghostwritten. And so the reviewer said, well, he's a much better writer now. He's, it's like, wow, he's really improved as a writer. No, he did not improve as a writer. He just affiliated with a better writer. So just to let you know about that. And then over here, one of the great dystopian science fiction novels is Swastika Night, which was written in 1936 and posited a future where the Nazis won. And this is before World War II. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it. Swastika Night. It takes place centuries from now, when the Nazis have built their world. And it's really, really, really good. And although it's credited to Marie Constantine, it was actually written by a woman, Catherine Burdekin, who was British. And the fact she wrote this in 1936 is just amazing. And it's it's a phenomenal book. It was decades before the identity of Marie Constantine was revealed. It was long after her death. And you can find new copies of this book. They're only a few bucks, but another great science fiction classic that I recommend. And I mean, at some point I should have like the Mr. Sci-Fi book club, something like that. Because there's so many books that are not well known, but are really deserving of attention. And then you have, old stalwarts like 1984, which is very dark, very bleak. But of course, one of the greats by Orwell. Originally, it was going to be called 1948, and and then they said, well, no, let's change those numbers around. And it came the American edition came out in 1949, and this is it. So there you go. Let's see now. Also, let's see if there's any more questions. Any headway on letting fans participate on Thursday nights? I've got to figure out how I want to do that. I just want to make sure that I'm not being tedious to the table members. But yeah, let me mull on that. Hello, J-Pod. Let's see. A book club would be great. I'm currently taking a literature of science fiction class in college and learning about so many great works. Yes, and there's so many of them, and it's funny because some books last and stay relevant and stay current, and others just kind of fade. There's a writer who won the Hugo for best novel. His name is Mark Clifton, and here he is, and he's largely forgotten. Sorry, I dropped this. And I've heard that he's rather a tedious writer. I haven't gotten to him yet, but won the Hugo for best novel, beat out some other books that were no doubt much, much better. And that's the way it goes, fellas. And let's see. And then this is, let's see. Hi, Mark Lungo. Thanks for sharing the BBC radio series. Fun to listen to First Man on Mars. Yes, I love Journey into Space is terrific. I love it. And it's here's the novelization of Journey into Space, signed by the author Charles Chilton, one of my treasures. And I would have loved to have met Charles Chilton. He died in his 90s, but I was not able to locate him in time to get to know him. So one of the books I inherited from my mom, by the way, is this Dear Abby book. Dear Abby used to be a newspaper columnist. She would advise people about how to behave and how to deal with life's travails. And this is copyright 1958. And she really got better over the years because it's like uh, you know uh, it's because some of her advice in this one is a little bit outdated. Uh, though here she says, "Don't go back to any man who wants to bury the hatchet until you know where he intends to bury it." So that's good. That's a good piece of advice, huh? Uh, so anyway, this is Abigail Van Buren. That was a pseudonym, and there was another advice columnist. What was her name? Ann Landers, and both of those were pseudonyms because the two women were actually identical twins, and for many years they never spoke. They didn't speak to each other. They were very embittered against each other, and I think when they got to be old ladies, they patched it up. I believe, if memory serves, but this is but I read her in the newspaper. I like to read her column because she was actually had a lot of compassion and was a pretty good egg, all things considered. So let's see. Mark Lungo says there are a zillion "What if the Nazis won" books. What's an alternative history scenario that hasn't been played out yet? Um, I was thinking of doing a book. I don't know if I'll ever write it, but I thought of a very interesting alternative history that I've never seen, which was there was the slave revolt in Haiti, where the slaves actually won and freed themselves. And I thought, well, what if in an alternate history that had spread to the South in America, and the South had basically had a slave revolt where the slaves took over, and the white people fled to the North, and so you had two countries, a white America in the North and a black America, separate country in the South. And what would that history have been like? And what would the modern day be like? What would race relations be like? And it's just a very interesting idea. And but I haven't written it yet, so we'll see what happens. Dusty Dirt says, I've read some of Donald Wollheim. Very interesting ideas of space that man had. Yeah, and also he was an editor. He edited the best science fiction of the year with Terry Carr, and then founded DAW Books, Donald A. Wollheim Books, and I've got a number of those here in my collection. But yeah, he was absolutely, really really cool guy and really good editor for one thing. But I mean these guys, these men and women who formed the first generation of science fiction were really um, something. They were very bright. They were very collegial. There wasn't a lot of backstabbing. There were some fan fights between them, but mainly they really liked each other. They really valued each other, and they were creating modern science fiction. So here's the novelization of Alien. This is the hardcover, and it's got just a great cover. Look at that. And it's novelization by Alan Dean Foster. He's done many, many, many novelizations as well um, as original novels. It's very fun here. It says Alien, a novelization by Alan Dean Foster based on the screenplay by a whole bunch of people, but mostly Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, who originated the scary thing in the first place. So there was a very bitter fight over credit on Alien, and Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett won, thank God, because they were the original writers. They worked out the story together, and then Dan O'Bannon wrote the script. But then when the producers came aboard, Walter Hill and David Giler, they did a rewrite on it and then tried to get sole screenplay credit. And the Writers Guild was so offended by that, they basically said, "You're not getting any credit. We'll give the full credit to Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett," which is great because that was arrogance from those writers, and they made it. It's funny because I've read the original screenplay and the plot is very, very much the same. I'd heard for years that Walter Hill really kind of brought this blue collar kind of gritty dialogue to it, and that's true. but the plot line, with the exception of the robot with the android, that was one thing that they put in, but everything else is pretty much the same plot turns. And so it was really Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett, and so I'm glad that they got to have the notice and the careers that they had. Um, let's see. Mark, that is an awesome idea. What, to have my own book club? Yeah, I think so. So, but let's see what else I can pull from here and share with you guys. Let's see. Here's a great Ed Emshwiller cover, "The Man Who Japed." Look at that, by Philip K. Dick. Really cool. And happy Halloween, everybody. By the way, I just wanted to let you know this is the cover of Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. The cover that I painted, the fake Marc Zicree issue, when I was in my early 20s, when I was writing the Twilight Zone Companion. So you can see what I did was painted this alien down there and a planet up here, but I also painted the clock from the Twilight Zone. And then on the back, I had another one of my paintings, which you really can't see there because it's got tape. But then I had all these books that I thought I would be writing, or here's books you can order from Marc Zicree. I was thinking about Harlan Ellison with this series of books from Pyramid Books, so it's like Pyramid Publications. You can get all of these books by Marc Zicree. So the only one I actually wrote was Making of the Twilight Zone, the Twilight Zone Companion. But the other titles were Victims, Empty Rooms, The Einstein War, Dark Corners, The Blood Under the Door, Shadows in the Dark, A Touch of the Creature, which was a Beaumont title, Dimension of Killers, Diary in Invisible Ink, and Below the Cement. All of those are pretty decent titles, actually. But but there you go. So let's see what also we have here to share with you guys. Let's see. Kevin Scott says, "What about an alternate history where the American Indians held most of their territory?" Yeah, I mean, the fun part with alternate histories is you can come up with almost anything, and the trick is then, okay, how do you make it credible? How do you make it play? How do you make it work? One thing I always wondered about was, they always talk about the Indians not having immunity, and the settlers, the Europeans brought over, smallpox and so forth, and decimated the Indians. But were there any diseases that went the other way? I'd heard that syphilis had, but that's not true. Syphilis had existed in Europe, way back with the Egyptians and stuff. So, but it's just interesting. I mean, if you wanted a storyline where the Indians maintained dominance over North and South America, you would simply have the disease go the other way. So, in other words, they don't spread smallpox to the Indians. The Indians pass on something to the Europeans that basically wipes out Europe, and that would be how you could do it. It would be fun and interesting. And then various people have posited an alternate history where the Mayans or the Aztecs, conquer Europe, and that's fun. I actually just came across a book of that recently with really cool illustrations. Let's see what else we have here to share with you guys. Um, Here we go. One of Ray Bradbury's mentors was my friend Norman Corwin. He was a great radio writer, and this is probably the greatest thing he ever wrote, "On a Note of Triumph," which was written at the end of the World War II in Europe. And this is a radio play that was broadcast on all networks simultaneously. It's gorgeous writing, and Norman inscribed this to me and Elaine. He was and a very handsome man when he was young, and he looked good throughout his entire life. He lived to 101, and the way I met him was he was a huge writer in the days of radio, and Ray Bradbury just idolized him. He was 10 years older than Ray, and they were really good friends. And actually, Corwin was responsible for Ray's first great success as a writer. He got him to come to New York and put him up in New York and introduced him to book editors. And Ray was able to sell Martian Chronicles and Illustrated Man on that trip, and that really got his career going in earnest. So, but Norman Corwin was the father of Diane Corwin, who was in my first drawing class at UCLA. And when I saw her name, I said, "Well, are you any relation to Norman Corwin?" And she was floored that I knew that name, because he was not well known to most of that generation. So, but he was just a spectacular writer. So, and a wonderful guy. Um, the Mayan alt history would be a great read. Yes, I agree. I agree. And again, there's such cultural biases, because when you read the Europeans writing about the Aztecs or the Mayans, you really wonder how skewed that is. And I liked Apocalypto because it showed that alternate culture, though historians say that was not accurate at all, and they're very up in arms about how all of the ways that Mel Gibson departed from the history. But that said, it still gave you a sense of a very, very different world and a very different visual aesthetic that was incredibly powerful. And so I think that movie's a very interesting film for all of its flaws. By the way, here is the American first edition of Day of the Triffids. So it's a similar kind of cover, but not quite as good. And let's see if I can tell you anything about this. Yeah, this is the book club edition. Many, many books, particularly science fiction at that time, when the first edition would come out, you'd also get a book club edition, which would generally be slightly smaller and printed on worse paper. And so it wouldn't, but it'd be less expensive, and so you could afford it. And when I say worse paper, this paper is still solid and totally good. I mean, this book was printed when 1951. So this book is how old? 50, 74 years old or 73 years old. I mean, it's doing pretty damn good. So you could still read it without wrecking it. So that's pretty amazing. I think they knew what they were doing back then. Whereas nowadays a book will be falling apart before you know it. So let's see what also we have here that I can tell you about. Let's see. Here's of course one of the novelizations of Metropolis from when the movie came out. This amazing, amazing cover. And if you look at the poster of the movie Babylon, it's got hands reaching toward Margot Robbie, and so it's very, very similar. But this is, this is one of the great movies, and it's one of the great books. And most people don't know that Thea von Harbo was Fritz Lang's wife. So his wife wrote Metropolis, and he was one of the great filmmakers of the era. Let's see. When I was a kid, I was scared to death of the movie Day of the Triffids. Yeah, it's scary. It's not a very good movie. It stars Howard Keel. There was a period in the 50s and 60s when British movies, genre movies, would cast an American actor, some usually an older American actor, maybe like 40s, 50s, sometimes kind of on the downside of their career. Brian Donlevy, Howard Keel, Forrest Tucker, and cast them with an all British cast shooting the movie in England. And so Day of the Triffids is one of those. The Crawling Eye is one of those, which is a wonderful film. And in fact, one of the actors in that film plays Jet Morgan in Journey into Space, so Andrew Faulds, and so you can see what he looked like. And there's a bunch of these, and Brian Donlevy played Quatermass in the movies. Not a good choice for that role. It's supposed to be this brilliant, crotchety scientist, and so the TV versions are much better. As is the one Quatermass film that was made in the '60s, which is 6 Million Years to Earth, which is also known as Quatermass in the Pit. And really a great film, and I highly recommend it. Let's see. Greetings from New Zealand. Hello, Pete. Harlan Ellison dropped by our small isle for WindyCon Wellington 1983. He was 49 then. Please, your thoughts on why he never committed to writing a great SF novel. I'll tell you why. The problem is that science fiction really, its strong suit was the short story. Most of the major novelists in science fiction, Heinlein, Asimov, Clarke, Bradbury, started as short story writers, and that was the form where they really developed their muscles. And in order to make a living, you had to pour these stories out in with great speed. And many of the science fiction writers were writing under other pseudonyms as well. In fact, I have one of my books somewhere up there is Sex Gang, which Harlan wrote, and it's these short stories of tough youth, and he wrote it under a pseudonym, and I was able to come upon a copy of it. Sadly, Harlan had already passed away, or I'd have had him sign it. But Harlan's strength was the short story and the essay, and he also wrote very good teleplays. As those of you who know of his TV work know that. He wanted to write novels, and he intended Boy and His Dog to be the first of 3 stories that would have made a novel of those 2 characters, the boy and his dog. And so he wrote Boy and His Dog, which was a really great novella. Then he wrote Egg Sucker, and he was, for years he was trying to do that novel, and it never quite got finished. And there were other novels he had in mind. At one point, he was talking to a book editor, mainstream book editor, and he said, "Look, it's not hard to write a bestseller. I could come up with one right on the spot that would be a bestseller." And the guy said, "Well, prove it." And Harlan came up on the spot with a novel, a mainstream novel called Shrike, The Shrike, and it was and the editor said, "My God, you're right. That's a bestseller. So I'll be happy to buy that and hire you to write it." And Harlan just never delivered it, never wrote it, and but that would have been a novel. Um, I haven't read many of Harlan's novels. Again, I read a lot of his short stories and essays. But he was variable, as were many of these writers. Silverberg was another variable writer who got better over the years. But Harlan was unforgettable. He was an amazing man, a singular personality, and I'm really glad I got to know him, as difficult as he could be. But I have pictures of him on my wall there, and a portrait I drew of him on my wall, which is, I think, the portrait of him on his website. I'm very sad that he died, and that Susan, his wife, died, and she was younger, and it was a big shock when she passed away. Um, Hans says, love browsing the LibriVox of old sci-fi audiobooks. Yes, for those who don't know, LibriVox.org is a site that has a lot of audiobooks for free. Also, there's Libby, where you can, if you have a library card, you can check out audiobooks for free, all the major ones, all the recent ones. And then there's Audible if you want to get a membership for like $14 a month or whatever, and get audiobooks, so I do all three because I love audiobooks. And you can find great stuff on all of those sites. I mean, you'd be surprised what you come across. There's things by Clifford Simak and Harry Harrison on LibriVox, and on and on. I mean, I just and because I'm so busy in my life, I don't have a lot of time to read books. I'm always reading physical books, but I also am always listening to audiobooks as well, and really enjoying it. One of the books, by the way, that I highly recommend is this book. It's the Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon, and it won the Hugo for Best Novel and deserves to be. It's one of the great alternate history books. It takes place in an alternate timeline where the Jews were relocated to Alaska. And so they weren't all exterminated during the Holocaust. Only 2 million instead of 6 million were killed, and the others were in Alaska. But it's a 60-year temporary period for them to live there. But it's about the society they built in Alaska just before they all have to leave. And it's a noir detective story, cop novel, and it's wonderful. And the audiobook, read by Peter Riegert, is terrific, just terrific. And it's really a wonderful, wonderful book and a wonderful piece of writing. And if you haven't come across it, definitely check it out. The Yiddish Policeman's Union. So let's see. Royal Road is a nice site. Also, many enjoyed many of the thought. He's enjoyed that, published on Amazon and Audible. Well, Royal Road. I haven't heard of that one, so I'll write it down. Royal Road, eh? Okay, I'll check it out. Also, if you want to hear a reading of the entire unabridged novel Sphere by Michael Crichton, that's here on Mr. Sci-Fi. Years ago, just for my own entertainment, I did a reading of Sphere just to do it, and because it wasn't available on online at that point, so I posted it so you can listen to it. It's really fun. I've been involved with collaborative songwriting projects with 3 to 4 people, but with writing books, it probably wouldn't work. It depends, It depends. Harlan, both George R.R. Martin and Harlan have written series of books or anthologies that were in shared worlds. Harlan did Medea, which where he had a group of people create a world, and then he wrote in it, and other writers wrote in it. And of course, George R.R. Martin did Wild Cards with other writers. It just depends. I mean, you have to be very careful which writers you choose to collaborate with. They have to be very reliable, and so that can be a journey in itself. I mean, when I wrote the Magic Time novels, Barbara Hambly and I co-wrote the first one. Maya Bonhoff wrote the second one, and I oversaw it, and we plotted it together. And then I basically wrote the third one. The writer who I collaborated with, I wasn't happy with the final version. Not his fault, really, but ultimately I had to take that one over, and I'm glad I did. I like all three of those novels, though the final one is my favorite of the three. Let's see. Wish we had gotten a sci-fi mosaic novel where a bunch of authors wrote short stories set in a shared city, like Thieves' World and Liebeck. Well, yeah. I mean, again, science fiction has such differing experiences. I mean, you can find so many things, and the variety of science fiction is much broader now. Though I think, from my taste, it's too turned inward because when I was growing up in the '60s, there were the proselytizers of the utopian future: Arthur C. Clarke, Heinlein, Bradbury, uh, Asimov, where they really thought they were creating a vision hand in glove with the scientists to basically land on the moon, go to Mars, explore the outer planets, explore other solar systems, and now we're doing it primarily with our robot probes. But they envisioned all this stuff. 2001 was supposed to be what the future we got. 2001: A Space Odyssey. But then as things kind of didn't go that way, a lot of writers turned inward, and the internet became a popular thing. And now people are writing about video games and all this stuff, and I find it rather tedious. I read Ready Player One; it's not my thing, and but I love The Martian. You know, I really am hoping for Elon Musk to make it to Mars. I wish he weren't so outspoken politically, and I wish he weren't so impulsive. But I think that he's doing amazing things in the world, and I applaud what he's up to in those terms. Let's see. He says, Bill Swim, have you read any of the Bill Baldwin Helmsman series? Not yet, no. And I'll make a note about that, and we'll find out about it because I'm always looking for new and cool stuff. Bill Baldwin Helmsman. Okay, Bill Baldwin. Helmsman. Okay, I'll check it out. Do love the sci-fi fantasy that are the lit RPG where some worlds get taken over by an alien system and sci-fi it into a game like setting. Yeah, I mean, yes, and I mean, there have been a lot of early predecessors or precursors that dealt with a game element. For instance, Arena, the great Frederick Brown short story that was plagiarized by Star Trek, and then they when and got the rights from him, not telling him that they'd already written and filmed it, was one of those. And let's see. Arrow Squirrel does a nice job of sci-fi audio readings of short stories, both short and long. Okay, I'll write that down too. Aggro Squirrel. Thank you. It's amazing, all these things that pop up here and there, and you know that you can't. There's so much now that you can't follow it all. God knows. Let's see. Kevin says Spaceling by Doris Pacherchia is a great book. Well, that's another good one. Okay, I'll check that out. I mean, again, it's fun to see what we can see. And I mean, I'm glad there are more women in science fiction now. I'm glad there are more uh, diversity of races and backgrounds and different sexualities. I mean, I'm not threatened by any of that. You know, and though I'm always looking for writers who are going to tell a story that I enjoy, and that can be male, female, whatever, as long as can cue into the story. I read, is it Nine Fates? I thought that was a good book, and I enjoyed it. Let's see what else is over here. Well, like for instance, earlier when I talked about Murray Constantine, this is a recent book of Swastika Night, and it has it and on the side of the page it says Catherine Burdekin writing as Murray Constantine. And when I read this, I had a I had a I found a bookmark at Barnes and Noble that said "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you will land among the stars." But I darkened out on the stars and put "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you will land on London," in memory of Werner von Braun and the V1 and V2 rockets. So pretty goofy. And then but behind me are also the Expanse books, which I enjoyed, and thought they did a good job. Love to write myself. Used to trade story commissions for artwork. That's fun. It's like I really like collaborating with brilliant people, whether they're writers or artists or make props or creatures. It's like it's really science fiction is a really great sandbox, and the more that we are working with really clever and passionate people, the better. Because we can make amazing things together, and I like being part of a tradition. So that it's not just me. This is, by the way, I mentioned earlier. Have a Spacesuit Will Travel. Here's a paperback edition, again signed by Heinlein. So I have these stickers that say signed by the author, which I put on books that are signed by the author, of course. And though this is the I Libertine, which was ghost written by Ted Sturgeon, and it says signed by the author, but it isn't actually. The cover is by Kelly Freas, and the famous science fiction artist, and he signed this copy. I don't know why I didn't have Ted sign it, but you know, c'est la vie. I have other signed Ted Sturgeon books. Ted Sturgeon's first hardcover book had an intro by Ray Bradbury, and I actually have it signed by both Ray and Ted Sturgeon. So let's see. Part of why I love to listen to the space folk songs. Yes, folk songs. I really enjoyed USF Sci-Fi panel with Harry Harrison, Frederick Pohl, and Brian Aldiss getting signed books from all in one night, 2009. Yeah, that's terrific. And I'm finding online on YouTube you can track down some of these panels were recorded or videotaped, and you can find some of them, and it's fascinating because I find that generation of writers extremely articulate, and whether it's and I met Harry Harrison, and he was a really interesting guy, and he also wrote Soylent Green, Make Room was the novel's title, and I wish I had a signed copy of that. He was really a cool guy, and but Harlan, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, on and on. They were very articulate men and very opinionated, but in a good way, because they would have opinions. They would actually say things that were interesting and well thought out. Theodore Sturgeon was a brilliant man, and hanging out with him was so much fun because he just saw things in a very different way, and he was really a cool guy, and I'm so glad I got to get to know him really well. And my photo of him is on several of his books. A photo I took when I was 19. Let's see. Soylent Green is people. It is indeed. It is indeed. For those of you who were not here for my last Mr. Sci-Fi live stream, here's Soylent Green. Here it is, a real product that you can actually go and buy. It's a drink and quite tasty. They've gotten the people taste out of it, thank God, and it tastes like chocolate. So, so but it's just so fun. All of the science fiction stuff. Previously I've talked about how the science fiction I was reading when in the 50s and 60s, that was published in the 50s and 60s, I was reading it in the 60s, was sort of a shared universe of all those writers, where the assumptions were we would land on the moon, we would colonize Mars, we would go out to the stars, we would invent fast and light drive. And so really, a lot of those writers were writing in sort of a very shared universe, without it being acknowledged or noticed, and that's really cool. So Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov and Ray Bradbury and Heinlein and all these guys kind of dovetailed together. They were all reading each other, and they were all friends. They knew each other and had been young men together, and so in that way, that was a shared universe of assumptions, and it really holds together and it really works, and it's super fun. And I only think it's chocolate. Exactly. Yes. Now we've got just about another. Let me see, like 3 more minutes. So if there's any questions you guys have, and again, please go pledge to the Kickstarter campaign. It's very dispiriting to me when I do these live streams and then I go to the Kickstarter page and for the next 24 hours there's no movement. It's like, oh geez, what am I? I'm shucking and jiving, and nobody's listening, no one cares. It's like, oh my God, But so please, if you can just go and pledge whatever you can pledge, it's meaningful. It's appreciated. We've got 101 people pledging so far. We need about 300 to get to our goal, and there's some amazing perks. You can be a producer. You can have a speaking role in Space Command, and all sorts of cool stuff. So, and if there's a pledge you'd like, if there's a perk you'd like that we don't have, tell me. Email me at marczicree@gmail.com, or and also if you're interested in buying Space Command shares for $7,500 each and get a percentage of my producers' net profits on Space Command, that's well worth doing, and the moment is now. So let's see. Many of the sci-fi ideas someone got motivated by to make a reality. Yeah, it's true. It's fascinating how we have communicators in our pocket, and wall screen TVs and rocket ships going into space and all this stuff that when these guys were writing it in the 50s, it was all a telephone was something that was connected to a wall. You'd have to find a payphone if you wanted to make a call outside your home. And we live in a very different world now. It's funny how technology slowly changes things, but some things remain the same. If someone time traveled from the 1930s to here, they would know how to drive a car. They would know how to turn on a light switch. They would know how to cook a meal. They wouldn't necessarily know how a microwave oven works, but they'd know how a regular stove works. They'd know to turn on the tap and get water. They'd know to go to a market and buy food. And and cash is still accepted, even though it's being phased out more or less by credit and all that stuff. But it's fascinating what stays and what changes. Whereas on the other hand, someone from the night, if someone teleported from like 1823 to 1923, they'd have a very hard time. And so technology really sped up in the recent decades and centuries. Let's see. Han says, once I get my finance problem solved, I plan to dealing with a missing chunk of money. Well, yeah, absolutely. When your chip comes in, please point it my way. Pocket computers, we have it not as Pandora handheld computer. Yes, yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating what we've got. I pledged on the Kickstarter. My small part helps. I hope. Yes, and I appreciate it. And if you have friends who are sci-fi fans, hip them to Space Command and let them know about Mr. Sci-Fi, because again, um, I'm telling stories that no one knows other than me, because they were told to me by Bradbury and Heinlein and Sturgeon and all, not Heinlein, but Sturgeon and all these guys that I knew. I knew the West Coast writers, not the East Coast writers. So Asimov and those guys were over there. Fred Pohl would come to conventions on this coast, so he was more of an East Coast kind of guy. And some of my teachers at Clarion, like Damon Knight, Kate Wilhelm, they were mainly East Coast, but they were at Clarion when I was there at Michigan State University. Uh, let's see. Blah blah blah. These are the best stories I share. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, guys. I see that it's now 7:01, so I'm gonna pull up stakes, but we'll do another live stream soon. We'll announce it on my YouTube, and I mean on all these different platforms of mine. So just check them out. Thanks for all the great comments and questions. You guys are terrific. None of this would be possible without you, and I cannot wait to share the first 6 hours of Space Command. You can get a box set on the Kickstarter campaign, 6 hours and the prequels. So it's got Mira Furlan and Bob Picardo and God, Armin Shimmerman, Christina Moses, Barbara Bain, Bill Mumy, Bruce Boxleitner. Just so many great science fiction actors, Michael Harney, and on and on and on and on. I'm very, very lucky in this life. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate everything everyone is doing, and we'll talk again real soon. Bye, guys.